It's time now to introduce our keynote speaker. Is that a CBC camera person here? Good morning. Did you guys say good morning to the CBC for us? Good morning. You guys still sound like you're sleeping. All right, our keynote is going to wake you up. His name is Dr. Lionel Laroche. He said it with more of a French accent, but I'm trying. All right, Lionel holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the California Institute of Technology, USA, yeah, not UCA, USA, and a Diplôme de l'ingénieur polytechnicien from École Polytechnique de Paris, France.
Très bien.
Thank you. Over the past 13 years, Lionel has provided cross-cultural training, coaching, and consulting services to a wide range of businesses, government, academic, professional, and nonprofit organizations in 10 countries: Canada, the US, Bermuda, Mexico, Peru, Belgium, Switzerland, France, the UK, and China. Can you imagine the stamps in his passport? Lionel is a thought-provoking and educational speaker, facilitator who presented at over 200 conferences and events across Canada and the US. He regularly teaches at several Canadian and American universities, including the University of Toronto's EMBA program at the Rotman School of Business. He is the author of 2 books and over 100 publications examining the impact of cultural differences on businesses at the organizational and individual level. His 2 books are entitled Managing Cultural Diversity in Technical Professions and Recruiting, Retaining, and Promoting Culturally Diverse Employees. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for Dr. Lionel Laroche.
What we're going to talk about today is essentially what you all came in here to Canada.
That was nice.
Succeeding in Canada. So if I can have my PowerPoint, that would be great. Yes, perfect. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is succeeding in Canada. And what I want to start with is understanding really why we need a conference like this. So I'm going to talk about what I consider as the real issue that immigrants face when they are trying to get a job in the Canadian labor market. The way I like to describe it is like this: technical skills versus soft skills. What are technical skills? Well, if you're an engineer, it's your ability to do calculations. If you're an accountant, it's your ability to calculate taxes, things like that. Soft skills, it's your ability to work with people, your ability to manage yourself, your own time, your own emotions, and so on. Conflict resolutions, presentation skills, a whole pile of skills, all right? Most Canadian organizations will break down their workforce like this. We'll have low, medium, high on each axis. Now, if you think of the average immigrant who just lands at Pearson Airport, okay, where does he or she ends up on this diagram? Well, most immigrants, when they arrive in Canada, will end up in the top left corner. Why do we have high technical skills? Well, we have high technical skills fundamentally because of the point system of Citizenship and Immigration Canada. You cannot come to Canada unless you have enough points, and so many points are allocated to education that amongst recent immigrants, the percentage of people with a bachelor's or more of education is actually quite higher, significantly higher than the percentage of people who have a bachelor's or more of education in Canadian population at large. Okay? So compared with Canadian population at large, recent immigrants are a very educated bunch, and we have high technical skills. Why do we have low soft skills? Well, we have low soft skills fundamentally because soft skills are measured by cultural standards. So there's no point in the point system allocated to soft skills. So among immigrants who come to Canada, some have amazing soft skills by their home country standards, some have average soft skills by their home country standards, and some have terrible soft skills by their home country standards. Okay? I've seen the whole range. But no matter where you were, based on that skill back home, you end up on the low end of the spectrum when you arrive in Canada. That's exactly what happened to me when I came to Canada. When I was in France, I was considered as having high soft skills. I was the treasurer of the first career fair at my university, captain of my rowing team, and maître d' in a restaurant. All situations that require high soft skills. However, as soon as I stepped in Canada, my soft skills went from high to low. I didn't change. But what changed was the criteria that the people around me were using to measure my soft skills. Okay? And if you've worked with people from France, you've probably noticed it. Okay? It's when I was giving negative feedback. French negative feedback is blasting by Canadian standards. Where a Canadian will say, oh, it's a good report, you may want to look at section 3 some more, but overall good work. A French person will tell you, redo section 3, it's wrong. It's the same message, you gotta work on section 3 some more, but it is delivered so differently that when I worked at Procter & Gamble, no technician wanted to report to me. I wish I was kidding. Now, the crux of the matter is the relative weights that we place on technical skills and soft skills. All right? When I look at Canadian organizations and I do the average of all professional jobs, so my definition of professional is anybody who needs a bachelor to do their job. So whether it's an engineer, an accountant, a nurse, an HR professional, IT professional, these are all professionals. Okay? If I look at all professional jobs in Canada, what I find is the relative weights placed on technical skills and soft skills are roughly 50-50. It depends on your profession. Technical skills matter more to an engineer or an architect than they do to a nurse or a social worker. I think we all agree on that. But if I do the average over all jobs, I find roughly 50-50. There's another very important point in a Canadian context. How does the weight placed on soft skills change as you move up in an organization in Canada? Well, it actually goes up. Okay? The higher you are in a Canadian organization, the more important soft skills become to your success. All right? So, using 50-50 as the relative weights, then what I find is lines of equal value are essentially diagonal. What do I mean by lines of equal value? Well, the person at the top left corner, so the recent immigrant, brings as much value to an organization as someone in the middle of the diagram or somebody in the bottom right corner of the diagram. Okay? Why? Because we weigh technical skills and soft skills equally. What is the situation in our home countries? All right? So, one of the characteristics that pretty much all our home countries, that includes mine, France, okay, have compared with Canada is our home countries are hierarchical. Okay? Back home, the boss is the boss is the boss. Which part don't you understand? Okay? And there's way more emphasis placed on technical skills than there is in Canada. The relative weights in most of our home countries are roughly 90-10. It varies from country to country and profession to profession, but I just want to show you the trend, all right? There's one soft skill where the difference is absolutely striking. It's making good presentations. This skill in Canada is essential. You won't go beyond like entry-level positions without making good presentations in a Canadian context, all right? Now, you can measure the importance of a soft skill in a culture by looking at the age at which kids start learning that soft skill. So, think about, for those of you who have kids, think about at what age your kids are making their first public presentation in the Canadian educational system. Well, you'll very quickly realize that they start very early. They start in kindergarten, very typically, and they do show and tell. Show and tell for the average Canadian kid is the first public presentation that you make, and you're typically 4 or 5 when you make it. By contrast, do you remember when you made your first public presentation? For many of you, it will be university, okay? Some of you, high school, okay? But it's very rare that it starts as early as it does in Canada. Why? Because in our home countries, making good presentation is not nearly as emphasized a skill. It's not nearly as important to your success. Okay? Now, by contrast, what do we find? Well, I'll take the example. My wife is from China. Okay? So for her, her first presentation was defending her undergraduate thesis. In other words, she was 22 when she made that first presentation. She had stood in front of the class before, but she recited things by heart. Okay, the first time she prepared the material, prepared the PowerPoint, and presented was university. Now, by contrast, Chinese kids will take Canadian kids on mathematics any day. Why? Because the Chinese educational system emphasizes mathematics to a much greater extent than the Canadian educational system. Okay? Everywhere in the world, you get what you pay for. If, like in China, the educational, well, everywhere the educational system is set up to teach the kids what the adults think is important to know, to succeed. So Chinese professors teach mathematics, Canadian professors teach presentations. Okay? That's the way it goes. Now, if 90-10 are the relative weights for technical skills and soft skills in our home countries, then lines of equal value are almost flat. It takes a lot of additional soft skills to compensate a small drop in technical skills. All right? So the practical consequence of this is something that just about every immigrant has experienced at least once. Imagine we have a recent immigrant competing for a job or promotion with somebody who was born and raised in Canada, or maybe somebody who has been in Canada much longer than candidate A. All right? Let me take my own example at Procter & Gamble. So I have a PhD. I competed for a promotion with a guy who has a bachelor's. No technician wants to report to me. He was quite popular. What do you think happened? He got the job. He got the promotion. Okay? How do you think I interpreted the situation? It's unfair. Okay? By French standards, a PhD beats a bachelor's any day. No contest. All right? So if he got the job, well, there's something unfair here. Now, I competed with another white guy, so I didn't blame racism and I didn't blame sexism. But I bet you money that would have been my reaction, my interpretation if I had been a woman or visible minority. Now, I'm not suggesting there is no racism and no sexism in Canada, but what I am suggesting is for most recent immigrants, the real issue is we do not understand the criteria by which our performance is being measured. And that's the number one thing you need to learn. All right, so whether you go through a bridging program, whether you're mentored, you're coached, you go through courses, whatever it is, you need to understand how your performance is measured, because that's what will determine, like how successful you are. All right, if you work on the wrong things, obviously it's not going to work. So think about this situation. Candidate A, thinks that he or she deserves the job or promotion that candidate B got. Okay. Because he or she, by Canadian standards, does not bring as much value as candidate B. Now, what does candidate A do at this point? What does the average immigrant do when he or she has been bypassed for a job or promotion? Go back to school. Yes. Number one reaction is we go back to school, to university, because if a bachelor's didn't work, then maybe a master's will do it. If a master's doesn't work, I'll go get a PhD. If a PhD doesn't work, I'll go get an MBA or I'll write a book. That's typically the mental progression we have. Right? Now, does that solve our problem? No. What do we need to do? Well, we need to work on our soft skills. And the trouble is we don't know and we don't know we don't know. That's the real issue. Okay? So, for example, well, once you've learned that soft skills matter, you still have quite a bit of work to do. So for example, in my case, I realized presentations really matter a lot to Canadians. So I need to make good presentations. I was a good presenter by French standards. That doesn't make me a good presenter by Canadian standards. The way I love to illustrate the difference is like this. Think it's a joke of 5 journalists from different countries who have been asked to write an article on elephant mating. Okay? So the American journalist wrote how to make $1 million by mating elephants. The French journalist wrote the secret love life of elephants. The German journalist wrote the psychological and sociological dynamics of elephant couples, part 1 from Carl the Great to Bismarck. The A Chinese journalist wrote, Chinese were the first to mate elephants during the Qin dynasty. And the Canadian journalist wrote, elephant mating, a federal, provincial, or municipal responsibility. Thank you. So, what does that joke mean? Well, fundamentally, even no matter what topic you're going to cover, the way you make it interesting to your audience will depend on their cultural backgrounds. And so even if you made excellent presentations by your home country standards, you will have to relearn what makes a presentation a good one by Canadian standards. All right? So remember, you need to understand how your performance is being measured. Now, my experience looking for a job is actually fairly simple conceptually. Okay, remember that word conceptually. In principle, all you have to do is find the answers to 4 questions. So the questions are, number 1, what problem are you good at solving? I would really like everybody to remember these 4 questions. Okay, what problem are you good at solving? Why is it so important to think about that question? Well, employers do not look to hire people. Employers are really looking to solve a particular problem. And if they have that problem often enough, then they will think, I will need to hire somebody who's good at solving that problem, who can solve it for me repeatedly. Okay? So the name employer is misleading. Their goal is not to employ people. Okay? They're business people. They're in business to make money for profit. Okay? Well, unless it's the government, obviously, or non-profit. But corporations are there to make money. So, if you want to get a job, you need to define what problem you are good at solving. All right? When you've done that, the logical next step is to figure out who has that problem, and notice the second part of the question, and is willing to pay money to have it solved. Those are very different things. It's fairly obvious. For example, I'm sure most of you would love to buy a new car, but very few of you will actually go buy one this weekend. All right? That's the difference between having the problem and being willing to spend money to have it solved. So you need to find people, or organizations, I should say, who have the problem you're good at solving and are willing to spend money to have it solved. Once you've done that, the next step is they need to know you exist. So how do you make them know you exist? Well, typically, that's where the resume comes in. You send your resume. And most immigrants are very aware of that particular point. And what I find is most people jump to step number 3. Let me write my resume and send it, broadcast it. Well, my experience is that doesn't work. Why? Because Canada is a land of specialists. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. Okay? So it's very important to identify who are the real targets. If you have a PhD, for example, there's typically less than 20 places in Canada who can use your skills. So your job search is really finding those 20 places. Okay? The rest, yeah, they might be on a good day interested a little bit, but they probably don't need you enough to pay you the salary that a PhD commands. Okay? So how do you make them know you exist? Well, number 1 is obviously sending resumes, but more importantly, networking. All right? And the final part is you need to convince them that you are the best person at solving that problem for them. Because otherwise, somebody else will get the job. It's a competition. Remember, the labor market is a market. All right? So it's critical to be able to convince people you're good at doing what you're doing. And how do you do that in Canada? It's by using numbers. You need to give people numbers that make them realize that, yeah, you've done something good. All right? So remember these 4 questions and try to find your own answers. There's no such thing as one size fits all. Okay? There's no one answer that will work for 2 different people in this room. Now, I've said Canada is a land of specialists, and I really mean this one. It's really critical to understand this point, because most immigrants come from cultures where the best person for the job is actually a generalist. So I've heard so many people describe their experience like this. For example, I'm a civil engineer, I can build anything. I'm an IT specialist, I can do anything with computers. I'm an architect, I can design any kind of building. That will get you absolutely nowhere in Canada. Because if your resume says, I mean, like, you know, in the objective, I've seen many people do, like, I want to be part of a growing organization where I can contribute my skills, all that kind of good stuff, okay? That is equivalent to telling the person, please put my resume in the garbage can. Okay? Because to them, it means absolutely nothing. In Canada, the reason Canada is so specialized is because we're so close to the United States. Any Canadian company that grows beyond a certain size will run into its American competitors. And a Canadian company cannot beat an American company on price because, first of all, our domestic market is much more than theirs, and ours is where, like, distribution costs just kill the pricing of any Canadian company because we're so widespread. So the only viable strategy of a Canadian organization is niche marketing. And go to the website of just about any Canadian organization, you will see that the first 3 words are, we specialize in. All right? Well, you need to specialize in something because that mindset trickles down throughout the organization. Okay? So, Canada is a land of specialists. Best example I can give you is medical doctors. In the UK, a family doctor is called a GP, general practitioner. Okay? They're generalists. In Canada, a family doctor is a doctor who specializes in family medicine. In other words, they specialize in being generalists. Okay? So remember that. You need to define your specialization. All right? And you also need to network with people within your field. So what do I mean by that? It's really critical to understand this point. And today is definitely an opportunity to network. But one of the key things I would like you to remember from today is, who do you network with? All right? Most immigrants will network with people from their own ethnic community. I'm French. It will take me about 2 seconds to recognize that somebody else is French in this room. Okay? And it will take us 5 seconds to become friends. If I'm Chinese, I can tell somebody's Chinese even before they open their mouth. And we will be friends 2 seconds later, right? So the point is, we network by country of origin. The trouble is, that's not the way Canadians network. And we need to network the Canadian way in order to be effective. So how do Canadians network? Well, fundamentally, they think of the world as a table. On one direction, you have the profession. So you have engineering, accounting, HR, and so on. Okay? On the other dimension, you have the industrial sector. So you have technology, financial services, oil and gas, and so on. Each of these is finely subdivided. So for example, engineering, you have chemical, electrical, mechanical, civil, environmental, and so on. Accounting, you have people who do income tax, financial analysis, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and so on and so forth. HR, training and development, succession planning, benefits, compensation, and so on and so forth. So each of these is highly subdivided. Vertically, you have the same level of subdivision. So, for example, in the high-tech industry, well, you'll have people who do semiconductor, you'll have people who do chips, you'll have people who do devices like RAM, you'll have people who do software, and so on and so forth. In the financial services, you'll have banks, insurance, like a retail bank versus investment banking, and so on and so forth. Oil and gas, distribution, exploration, production, mining, and so on and so forth. So each of these is finely subdivided. Each of you needs to be able to define himself or herself as the intersection of one line and one column. Okay, so if I take the example of my wife, before she joined my company, she specialized in human resources within the IT sector, okay, the high-tech sector. There's one association in Canada called the Canadian Insurance Auditor Association. What kind of people do you think attend a meeting of the Canadian Insurance Auditor Association? Insurance auditors, okay? So auditors is the line, insurance is the column. When I was working at Xerox, I was a scale-up engineer specialized in specialty chemicals. So that's my line and my column. It's very important for all of you to define your line and your column and test it with Canadians. I'll give you an example. I worked with an Indian guy. He called himself an architect. So he kept going to conferences on architecture, and he applied at the Ontario Association of Architects. He applied at architecture firms and so on. And every time he heard, "You're not an architect." And he was getting very, very frustrated because his degree said architecture in India. So eventually somebody sat him down and told him, "Look, you have designed subdivisions. You have not designed a single building. People who design single buildings in Canada are called architects. People who design a subdivision are called urban planners. You need to network with urban planners." And his job search took a quantum leap when he started to look for urban planning jobs. All right? So today, I'm going to ask you to do one thing. I'm going to ask you to network the Canadian way. What do I mean by that? When somebody introduces himself or herself to you, all right, the first thing Canadians ask is, "What do you do?" And they'll tell you their line and their column. So typically they'll tell you, "I'm a insert here your profession, specialized in insert here your industrial sector." All right? When the person introduces himself or herself to you, you introduce yourself to that person. And you also mention your profession, your industrial sector. So the idea is this. If you have a match on the line, great. We can talk shop. If we have a line on the column, we can talk shop. Because if we're on the same line, we do the same kind of job. If we're in the same column, we're in the same industry. Canadians, if you don't match either the line or the column, what will they do? They'll walk away. Okay? Have a nice life. We don't have anything in common. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to focus on networking with the people who are on the same line and the same column as you are. Okay? So we really want you to take ownership of your job search. Yes, the federal government can do lots of things. The provincial governments can improve things. The municipal government can improve things, and regulatory body can also improve things, and non-profit associations, universities. There's lots of stakeholders. But in the end, it is your job search. And you need to find your own solution. So remember, at some level, you have concerns. Things that matter, okay, like the state of the economy. All right? You can't really do too much about that. On some level, there are things you can influence. Okay? When you network, you cannot influence people beyond a certain level. But you can try to get some information from them, for example. And then there's control. Control is the things you really have a big impact on. So in other words, control is if you put enough energy into it, there's a 95% chance or more that you'll get what you want. All right? So concern, you have no control on the economic situation in Canada. Influence, if you network extensively, you can influence how quickly you will get a job. The biggest thing you control is the way you use your time. That's the critical element in a job search that I find many people, like, for example, not a very effective use of your time is creating one resume, sending it to 500 places. That resume is probably the wrong one for at least 499. Okay? You need to create a new resume for every position you apply to. All right? So the way you apply, and then once you've sent a resume, try to network to find someone in the organization through LinkedIn, through all your network. And try to go to events, become active in professional associations. Those are all the things that are high payoff in terms of activities. So, succeeding in Canada. I'll give you 5 suggestions, all right? 5 things to remember. 1, focus on continuously improving the communication of your technical skills. For immigrants, during the job search, that's the critical soft skill. how do you communicate that you are technically competent? Okay? The next one is define clearly your specialization. That is critical for everybody. If the answer is, if I ask you what problem can you solve and you tell me I can solve anything, the answer, the reaction of the average Canadian is bullshit. Okay, sorry. Conduct an extensive labor market survey that is specific to your skills. So remember, what problem are you good at solving? Who has that problem and is willing to spend money to have it solved? Network by profession and by industry. All right? And finally, focus on the part you control, your time. Make sure that whatever minute you spend on your job search is spent on high payoff activities as opposed to broadcasting your resume. All right? So, thank you very much for your time and attention, and really take advantage of this day. I mean, it's one of the best opportunities you'll have to network with people. Thank you.
Sounds like Dr. Laroche wake you up. How was he, ladies and gentlemen? Let's hear it for Dr. Lionel Laroche. Before you leave, we're hoping that you guys have a few questions for him. We don't have a lot of time. We've got a busy day planned for you here, but there are some microphones set up at the sides, and if you have any questions for Dr. Laroche, please make your way to one of the microphones.
I'm going to start off, actually I'll just steal this straight. I'm going to start off the questions for you, Dr. Laroche, by asking, it's a general one, but an important one. What's the biggest hesitation for employers looking to hire new Canadians?
That's a good question. The biggest hesitation of any employer when hiring anybody is getting somebody who's going to create headaches. So what I mean by that is the person is going to require way more attention than, and so as a result, it's going to take so much time that from me as a manager that I might as well do the work myself. So on the immigrant side, I find the number one issue once people have been hired is the lack of initiative. Okay, this is related to the fact that we come from hierarchical cultures. So when our boss tells us do something, the first question is how do you want me to do it? And that clearly creates problems. So I would say that would probably be my answer. Like, people are really concerned that they will have to spend too much time managing that person.
So then my follow-up question is, how do you convince them, let's say if you're doing an interview, that you are not going to be that person? You are not going to create an extra headache for them?
Well, to convince people that you are the right person for the job, you essentially need to pass what I call, the Duct test. So the Duct test, very simple, is if you walk like a duck, quack like a duck, and fly like a duck, you're probably a duck. Well, it's that simple, okay? So in other words, I got that from PEO. PEO says, well, the Experience Requirement Committee, they have you come in front of the committee, and the committee will decide, do you speak, think, and behave like an engineer? And if you do, you're probably an engineer, okay? What they forget to say is Canadian engineer. So you have to think, speak, and behave like a Canadian engineer. So in other words, when you go for the job interview, you have to speak, behave, and communicate and think like someone who's doing that job in Canada. Okay?
All right, do we have any questions? Right there, go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anjani Mohammed, and I have been here for 2 years.
Okay.
I am a clinical social worker specialized in mental health, actually.
Okay.
And my question to you is, over the 2 years of living here in Toronto, I'm a graduate of U of T, and my master's degree is American.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of problems in terms of accreditation or anything. I'm very lucky in that respect. Unfortunately, I am in a profession where networking does not exist. So how do we do it? We are very high on both technical and soft skills, but trying to network, and this is, it's admitted among other underemployed social workers. It's a terrible issue.
There are tons of opportunities to network among social workers. I mean, there's conferences. I mean, I've presented at many conferences of social workers, so I know they exist, okay? The other one is, there is the acronym is OCSW, SSW, okay? So Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, my recommendation to network with within that profession is for you to go become a member of one of the chapters and become active in the chapter.
The unfortunate thing is the chapters are not very active.
Then
Because
make
I've
it
been a
active.
member of them.
Make it active, okay?
That's
Make
what-
it active. I'll tell you, I mean, it took me 2 years to convince my wife she should be active within the HRPA association. Now she's become the manager of the professional development in her chapter. And this year they're going to do a one-day conference on leadership. That will be the first time they do it in her chapter. So if there is no opportunities, then create it, and you will have even more of you will make even a bigger splash in your profession that way. Okay? Question over. I'm sorry, you're in charge.
I think we see one right up there. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning. I guess it doesn't matter who I am, but I'm mechanical
It
engineer
matters to us.
in the raw and the column. I'm solar energy researcher, so you know who I am. So that's the best I got from your presentation, first of all. And I have a question about the first part. You were talking about Canadian style or Canadian culture.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see each year around myself more and more people around the globe. So where is the Canadian? Are you making it up for us to believe it? Or really there is something and I haven't figured it out yet?
All right, good question. Well, I definitely believe there is such a thing as a Canadian. Now, let me expand a little bit, and I will contrast with the United States to illustrate the point, because I live there, and it's very clear that the U.S. That we didn't see eye to eye on this particular point. In Canada, the way I would describe it is this: there's no Canadian way of life. At home, you can do whatever you want, as long as you don't break any law. Your neighbor will not say anything. Okay? There's no problem at all. You can live your life whatever way you want at home. In the workplace, there are two Canadian ways of working. The English Canadian way of working in English Canada and the French Canadian way of working in Quebec. Okay? They're different. There's no question about that. And you need to understand these two. Well, if you're in English Canada, you need to understand the English Canadian way of working. The one assumption that is fundamental in Canada, that every one of us needs to either integrate deeply or we will be outside of Canadian society, is Canada is fundamentally built on conflict avoidance. Okay? The number one goal of Canadian society, the way it's set up, is to avoid any conflict. All right? So as long as you accept that and you accept all the consequences that come from that, then there's no problem integrating in Canadian society. All right? So yes, there is a Canadian way of working. And my experience is, in my case, I made a deliberate decision when I came to Canada because I had lived in the US. I had seen French people who had lived in the US for 30 years, and they clearly never made the decision to live in the US. They just decided to stay one more year, 30 times. Okay? When I came to Canada, I decided, no, I'm not going to, well, first of all, my wife had a job, my first wife had a job that was very unportable. She was a professor of planetary science at York University. So that job, let me tell you, once you got it, you keep it, okay? I knew we were not going to go anywhere. So it was clear we were going to live in Toronto, and I made the decision I'm going to integrate professionally. So when it comes to working, I'm trying to be as English Canadian as I can be in the workplace. At home, I made the very clear decision I will be French. So the way I interact with my wife and my kids is French. In particular, I yell at my kids the way I yell at I would if I was in France. Okay?
All right, thank you for your question.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay. How do you differentiate between networking and nepotism or parochialism? I'm telling you this
Networking and what? I'm sorry?
Nepotism,
Oh, nepotism.
yeah, or parochialism.
Okay. Well,
Okay, I'm telling you this.
or don't worry, you don't need to tell me anymore because I understand very well the question. Nepotism is exactly the way I interpreted the situation when the guy got the promotion and I didn't. Okay? The way I interpreted the situation is he got the job because he plays golf with the boss. Okay? So, no, the answer is not playing golf. The answer to the problem, so what happened when he was playing golf with the boss? Well, fundamentally what happened is this. They talked about work, about life, about a number of things. And by listening to our common boss, what happened is he learned how my boss was thinking. And I was absolutely adamant my PhD, was the answer. So all my focus was on my technical skills. I was trying to do as good a job technically as I could. And so what happened is, well, I was putting emphasis in the wrong areas. Okay? My boss told me one day, look, you got an A+ in an area that counts for 20%. You got a C in an area that counts for 50%. Guess what? Your grade is not as good as his grade. So there's no question that, now I'm not suggesting there is no nepotism in Canada, okay? But what I am suggesting is this. This is the part about ownership. You do not control and you have no influence on how much nepotism there is in Canada. You have control over what you do, how you use your own time. And the other thing is you also have control over your ideas, your thoughts. What I can say is this. I've seen a lot, I've worked with immigrants now for 13 years, okay, and I've coached individually probably 1,000 people. And what I found is this. People who see the world from a discriminatory perspective will tend to be reinforced in that perspective. Like if you go to a job interview thinking that the interviewer will discriminate against you, trust me, you will come out of the interview thinking that you've been discriminated against. All right? So again, I'm not suggesting there is no discrimination in Canada. What I am suggesting is you do not put your energy focusing on that. Because you have no control over whether the person who interviews you discriminates or not. But you do have control over what you do and how you behave and how you think. And so I want you to go into an interview thinking you will get the best chance possible. And you will do the best job possible. Because that's the way you will have your best chances. If you go in thinking you will be discriminated against, then the interviewer will sense it, because people who feel they're discriminated against will typically behave like they have a chip, they're angry at the world kind of thing. And the interviewer will say, that's the last person I want in my organization. And now your beliefs are reinforced. You didn't get the job. The person discriminated against you. There's the proof. Okay? So the world tends to be, to some extent, not entirely, but to some extent, the way we see it. Okay? So I will really encourage you to try, and particularly if you have people in your network who see the world from a discriminatory perspective, don't give them the time of day. Okay? Stay away from them. Remember when you were in your home country before leaving? I'm sure there were tons of people in your home country who told you, oh, it's going to be awful, it's going to be very difficult. Did you talk to them? Not much. You moved on to people who told you, hey, you can do it. There are tons of opportunities out there. So it's the same thing here, okay? Don't focus on people who tell you, oh, you're going to be discriminated against, you don't have a chance, might as well become a janitor, okay? That's not true. I can give you hundreds of examples of people who have who are very successful in Canada, and I really do believe that, by and large, it is an equal opportunity country. And the best proof I can give you is I do tons of workshops for corporations, and this is exactly what they're looking for. How do we make it an equal opportunity organization? Okay?
Dr. Laroche, thank you very much. I know we don't like conflict here in Canada, but we do have to wrap it up.
I can go on for 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it very much. If you didn't get a chance to ask Dr. Laroche a question, hang on, because we have 3 panelists that are coming up that are examples of exactly what Lionel was just speaking about. We'll introduce them to you now, and then afterwards you will have a chance and a longer session to ask questions of them and get some of their feedback as well.